Alright guys, I just did a video talking about some of the mass war games that were going on there in Eastern Europe, particularly with the US and NATO forces, and I talked about how the US and Ukraine Marines were holding a massive amphibious assault drill, and I also alluded to the fact that I'd be doing a video talking about some of the other mass military war games going on in that region involving competing nations, or nations that don't see eye to eye, we'll put it that way. And I talked about how the Chinese fleet of warships and a Chinese destroyer was headed to the Baltic for drills with Russia. And, of course, they just held drills with Russia down in the Mediterranean as well. And so now they're headed up to the Baltic. And on their way there, here's a report that talks about how British, Dutch, and Danish ships had escorted the trio of Chinese vessels, which are heading to the Baltic Sea, as I said, to conduct the first stage of joint drills with Russian warships and the Russian Navy. And it says here, a Chinese frigate, a supply ship, and a destroyer are passing through Danish waters. We are escorting them as part of the normal surveillance we have in our territorial waters. Klaus Thing Rasmussen, a senior duty officer at the Danish Military Operations Center, told reporters. And he said, we sent one unit out to them last night when they were approaching Danish waters, and it will take around a day in total until they leave again near Brunholm, where they entered, and we will escort them the entire way. Now, he added, our position is that there is free passage through the Baltic Sea, and the Danish Navy acts as a stopper in the gap. That means we accompany foreign state vessels as part of our surveillance of Danish waters, he went on to add. Now, this Chinese flotilla hasn't had much time to itself, it says in the piece here, as it moves towards the Baltic. On Monday, the Dutch Navy confirmed that its fleet had also dispatched an escort. Now, and what they dispatched was the HNL MS Van Amstel, Carol Dorman class ship, which is one of the multi-purpose frigates of the Dutch Navy. And during the weekend, the Chinese vessels were also escorted by the HMS Richmond, a Type 23 frigate of the UK Royal Navy, or the British Royal Navy. And a quote from a Royal Navy spokesman told reporters that, and I quote, we can confirm that the HMS Richmond has escorted a Chinese Navy task group through the UK area of interest. And the Baltic phase of the Russian-Chinese exercises start on Friday here, and will involve about a dozen warships in addition to military aircraft and helicopters from both sides, according to a statement back on Monday from the Russian Defense Ministry. And Chinese forces are apparently scheduled to arrive in the naval base of the Baltics in the, Baltisk, if I said that correctly, I apologize, in Russia's Kaliningrad region there. They're scheduled to arrive there on July the 21st for an official welcoming ceremony, and the active phase of the drills will be held between July the 24th and 27th, according to reports here that I'll link you guys up with. Now, Chinese forces, as I said, are going to be arriving there, and if you remember, earlier in July, the Chinese Navy said that the Type 052D Haifi destroyer would be deployed for these drills, and the warship is accompanied by the missile frigate Yongchen and the, if I say this correctly, if I butcher it, please forgive me, the Luamahu replenishment ship will be alongside the frigate there. And the second stage of the Chinese-Russian drills will continue, as I alluded to in previous videos. After they conduct these drills, they just conducted drills down in the Mediterranean. Now they're headed to the Baltic to conduct drills with Russia there. And then, in September, they're going to conduct drills in the Sea of Okhotsk and the Sea of Japan. Very tense region when you're talking about what's going on there on the Korean Peninsula. And now Russia and China will be conducting mass drills over there in the midst of this. So there you have it, folks. I'll link you up to this piece, and I want to briefly touch on one other piece. But we had UK, Dutch, and Danish navies escorting these Chinese warships up to the Baltic from the Mediterranean for these drills, these continued mass military drills with the Russians amid the ongoing mass militarization there in Eastern Europe. And of course, as I always allude to, amid this mass U.S. NATO military buildup on the borders of Western Russia, which of course Russia has been very vocal in opposition to, and has stated that they would be upping their military maneuvering in the region in response. And so from both sides, we've seen Cold War era-esque types of militarization occurring here. So China, as we see here, and this is another piece I'm going to link you guys up with. It came across the wire yesterday, talking about how China's advanced destroyer was going to take part in these drills with Russia in the Baltic Sea. And it talks about how Russia and China will be conducting this first stage of their joint C-2017 naval drills off the Baltic coast this week, according to the Russian Defense Ministry's confirmation. And Beijing has sent one of its most advanced missile destroyers for these exercises. Now, the Baltic phase of the exercise, as I mentioned previously in the previous piece, is starting this Friday and will involve about a dozen warships, in addition to military aircraft and helicopters from both sides. And in a statement from the Russian Defense Ministry, they said the main goals of the exercises are to increase the efficiency and cooperation between the two fleets in countering security threats at sea, to train compatibility of the crews of Russian and Chinese warships, to strengthen friendship and cooperation between the Russian Navy and the naval forces of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. And again, that's a statement straight from the Russian Defense Ministry. And again, it's highlighting the unification that's been ongoing and really accelerating to levels never before seen between the Russians and the Chinese, which is entirely biblical. And I'm going to be doing videos talking specifically about that and their roles in some of these end-time prophecies that are being foreshadowed right here before our very eyes, folks, as the Word of God continues to come alive in world events. And it mentions in the piece here that how last week, on their way to the Baltic, as I previously mentioned, the Chinese fleet actually engaged in live-fire drills there in the Mediterranean. And after the conclusion of the first phase of the drills off the Baltic coast, the Chinese Navy will join Russian ships in the Sea of Japan and the Sea of Okhotsk in September for the second phase of these Russian-Chinese exercises. And you know, the Chinese and Russian navies have been staging joint sea maneuvers ever increasingly since back in 2012. And last year, an active stage of the drills was conducted in the South China Sea, another highly contested, highly tense region, and one of the most contested regions in the world, as a matter of fact. So I'll link you up to these reports in the description box below, as usual, folks. But there you have it. Mass militarization and war games continue at wars and at levels not seen since the Cold War era, as you know, Russia and China holding mass military maneuvers at the same time. The U.S. and NATO forces basically in the same region, pretty much holding mass military maneuvers. And of course, it's well documented and been widely reported for years now, the ongoing mass military buildup in the region there in Eastern Europe along the borders of Western Russia, and of course the saber rattling between the world powers that are involved, which is nothing more than signs of the times, foreshadowing end-time Bible prophecy, as I've always said, folks. And so the links are below. Until next time, guys, much love, and God bless, my friends. Alright, guys, I just did a video talking about some of the mass war games that were going on there in Eastern Europe, particularly with the U.S. and NATO forces. And I talked about how the U.S. and Ukraine Marines were holding a massive amphibious assault drill. And I also alluded to the fact that I'd be doing a video talking about some of the other mass military war games going on in that region involving competing nations, or nations that don't see eye to eye. We'll put it that way. And I talked about how the Chinese fleet of Dutch and Danish ships had escorted the trio of Chinese vessels, which are heading to the Baltic Sea, as I said, to conduct the first stage of joint drills with Russian warships and the Russian Navy. And it says here, a Chinese frigate, a supply ship, and a destroyer are passing through Danish waters. We are escorting them as part of the normal surveillance we have in our territorial waters. Klosting Rasmussen, a senior duty officer at the Danish Military Operations Center, told reporters. And he said warships and a Chinese destroyer was headed to the Baltic for drills with Russia. And, of course, they just held drills with Russia down in the Mediterranean as well. And so now they're headed up to the Baltic. And on their way there, here's a report that talks about how British